destined for sold-out tickets under stadium lights. These days, fortunes changed on Detroit rapper 42 Dugg. These days, he's been slugging it out in the federal pen. And if you've been following his IG close enough, you probably already know the rapper is also being tortured in jail. It's so bad that everyone who's everyone in the game wants 42 Dugg out ASAP. I'm talking Yo Gotti, G Herbo, Lil Baby. If you recall, it was on Lil Baby's We Paid that 42 Dugg got his time in the sun. So how the hell did he fall off? How did 42 Dugg cross both 12 and the feds? And why is he being tortured in jail? Troubling beginnings. This is the pen that they got 42 in, United States Penitentiary in Atlanta. Now, it ain't the worst pen in the US, but it's also not the kind of place you send a rapper to, except if they're in a gang, the mafia, or a terrorist. But 42 Dugg don't fit any of these categories. He got in because he had pressed the feds to the point of frustration. More on that in a minute. But for now, let's talk about what 42's been complaining about in prison. In an already deleted post on IG, he gave us some BTS commentary on his living conditions behind bars. He wrote, ATL US Marshals trying to keep me from going home. I supposed to got out October 14th of last year. They illegally held me without reasoning because they felt my federal judge in Detroit shouldn't have gave me a bond. Now, there's some truth in this. He should have gotten out. He shouldn't even be in prison. But his story here is incomplete, and you'll understand soon what's missing. Meanwhile, 42 Dugg would say that he began receiving threats. I let that slide after I got sentenced. One of them tell me he not sending me to prison. He gonna make me do my time in the county jail, which is 10 times worse. Then he had the nerve to tell me he knows where I live. Now, I don't know if the county jails are really 10 times worse than federal pens. Any of y'all with experience can check me on this in the comment section. But the part of this commentary that's a bit concerning is the fact that Dugg is saying the marshals are not only making his life hell, they're also sending him direct threats. They telling me the marshals trying to ruin your life. They don't want you going home. They haven't even submitted my paperwork for me to receive my out date and calculate my days. I need the best civil lawyer in Georgia, man. Couple all this with the fact that he ain't getting any of the basic amenities inmates need to live properly behind bars, and you can understand why 42 Dugg's been spazzing out on social media. Now, this alone is enough to set alarms ringing. You kind of want to ask if they aren't about to Sarah Blandis, homie. It's like some blue on black violence. Is he gonna get off behind bars and then they cover it up as an error? Hold on. And trust me, I'm not trying to take the side of the cops or the feds when I say this, but 42 Dugg might be an architect of his current situation. I ain't taking sides. I'm just gonna present the facts to you and leave you to judge. Who really is 42 Dugg? Born and raised in Detroit, Deon Hayes, the man we now know as 42 Dugg, had a really rough childhood. Things were tough and he moved with the wrong crowd from the jump, but he never got caught lacking by the law until he was 15. Carjacking and possession, those were his charges. Now, while 15 is a pretty young age to be in hot water with the police, it also served as a taste for things to come, because 42 Dugg got handed a 4-year sentence that he described as frustrating. Because while he was supposed to be living out his best times as a teenager in the streets, he was behind a cage. So he decided to make the best out of his time there.
You started rapping in prison, right?
Yeah.
And how old were you?
I'd say probably like 19.
Okay.
What made you start rhyming? Like, you just...
I was in a whole, like, stressed out of that bitch. Like, the whole, like, you get to come out 1 hour out the day. I was in there for, like, 60 days straight, so.
Now, you're probably wondering how anyone gets 60 days straight in the hole. It's crazy, but it's because the homie got into a prison fight so bad, officials decided the only way to keep the peace was by sending 42 to spend some time in the hole. But all's well that ends well, right? Because like he mentioned, it was all this time in solitary that allowed Dugg to focus on his craft. And by the time he would get out in 2017, he reconnected with childhood friends, some of whom were rappers, some of whom were the relatively unknown Lil Baby at the time.
Really, Baby had put Gotti on my music, you know what I'm saying? So
love. And the rest is history, huh?
No, really, he played my music, but he didn't tell him who I was. Gotti, like, I asked, like, well, who is this? He like, this is my homeboy from Detroit. He like, this is my homeboy from Detroit. He hard, you know what I'm saying?
Now, 42 Dugg could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now he was in the same room with an OG who was ready to make him a star. This was his big break, right? I mean, what could go wrong? The answer to that question turned out to be everything. How to destroy a budding hip-hop career. As 42 Dugg's music career began creeping from underground to mainstream, the rapper began working against himself. I don't know who this dude thought he was up against, but for anyone watching, 42 Dugg was 42 Dugg's biggest op. 2019, in the heat of several infractions and failed drug tests that the police had chosen to either ignore or let him off easy on, our felon decided to go to the gun range. Now, if you know nothing about the law around this particular situation, it states that a felon cannot own or shoot a weapon. Why? Fam, it's obvious. And there's no way 42 didn't know the kind of fire he was dealing with. Long story short, someone snitched on him to 12. There was surveillance footage of him possessing, loading, and shooting a loaded 9mm pistol at a gun range. He was ultimately arrested and charged with felony firearms possession in March 2020. Now, you would think the trouble ended there, and you would be wrong. At the height of the We Got Paid song, 42 ran a stop sign while driving in a rented car and while on the run from the cops. I mean, you can't make this shit up. By August of the same year, 2020, he would be arrested again for evading the cops for 2 months, and he was hit with a third-degree felony for running from the police. He was eventually released on a $20K bond on the condition that he would serve 6 months in a federal prison camp. Meanwhile, 42 Dugg was still on the rise, dropping features back-to-back and getting signed to Yo Gotti's CMG label. By 21, he dropped his debut album, and it did good, solidifying his rise. But with every step my man took forward, he found himself taking several steps back. May 2021, 42 Dugg and his lawyers enter a plea negotiation for his gun charges. He's facing 10 years at the time, but the plea deal is a saving grace. My man walks off without jail time, but he gets probation. But some weeks later, the case is revisited by the judge, who now has a change of heart and gives 42 a 6-month jail sentence and 2 years of supervised release. A bit tough, but sure sounds better than a decade in the pen. Now, once again, you'd think 42 Dugg would cooperate with the feds. You'd think he'd play ball and follow the process, lay low, focus on navigating his career through the mess he put himself in. And once again, you'd be wrong. Because not only did the rapper ignore the 6-month sentence, he dodged the feds just like before and didn't even have the decency of falling off the radar. 42 Dugg was all over the media, appearing at basketball games and getting into IG live fights with our registered rat 6ix9ine.
42 Dugg, I will smack the shit out you, bro. I will smack fire out you, nigga.
It was a shitstorm of trouble, and it was headed for 42's doorstep. As you can imagine, the feds started actively looking for him, and when they found him, there was hell to pay. Ocean's 42. 2021 and 22 were pure chaos for 42 Dugg. Stuck in an unending probation hell of his own making, and in trouble with both 12 and the feds, 42 pushed Lady Justice one last time by skipping a hearing and evading a 6-month sentence that was pending. Now the feds were bent on making an example out of the Detroit rapper, but first, they had to catch him. In 2022, 42 Dugg was on his way back from an NBA game in Memphis when the feds got tipped off that he was airborne. Word was that he was in a private jet and that he would drop at some airport in Tennessee, but they weren't sure which one. But you can be sure they narrowed it down and got the most likely ones he would be dropping at. But there was one problem. There was no record of the rapper on any travel log. If he was in the air, he was on a plane that had not logged him in their manifest, which was illegal. Turned out, they were correct. 42 was in a PJ with no tail number, and he had conveniently been left off the manifest. But since there was a red alert on his ass, the moment he dropped off at the airport security cuffed him and alerted the feds. When the feds did arrive, they found that he had enough on him to travel anywhere in the world that he wanted to go. $25,000 in cash and more than $100,000 in jewelry. Soon after all that, 42 Dugg was labeled a flight risk. To make it short, sweet, and simple, prosecutors argued that 42 Dugg couldn't be trusted because he not only had an unregistered plane, he also had access to a pilot that was willing to fly an unregistered plane. In April, 42 Dugg was sentenced to 1 year behind bars after pleading guilty to prison evasion. As part of the sentence, he'll also serve 3 years of supervised release, as well as pay a $20,000 fine and not use illegal drugs. In the meantime, his label boss, Gotti, has sent word out that he's willing to pay 7 figures for any lawyer who can get 42 Dugg out on time. I don't know about you, but I think he got off pretty easy when you consider the chase he gave both 12 and the feds. And my advice would be for the rapper to do his time and stay under the radar for once in his life. It's sad he's having to deal with crazy marshals raiding his cell and all, but with the kind of eyes on him, I don't think any officer would want to risk incurring the wrath of the black and hip-hop community by hurting Dugg. But what do you think? Does 42 Dugg deserve the crazy he's experiencing behind bars, or is it just not right? Is there a way out for the Detroit rapper, or should Gotti stop wasting his time?